Hello and welcome back. This is week 4 of Math 101, and I hope you're all well, and healthy, doing the best you can in all of this. It's a little crazy, but the semester is nearing the end, and we will lighten up in MAT 101 after the exam, which is coming up here. So Friday the 24th is exam 3. It'll be on Top Hat. You'll have 24 hours to do it on Friday. You'll have 2 chances per question. I will have some Zoom office hours that day in case you have some confusion. Then after that, we're gonna wind down pretty quick in MAT 101. There is a small paper due. It's quite small, but then we'll try to wrap this up so that people aren't worrying about this class as the semester ends. If you are interested in office hours, check the Blackboard announcement. There's a schedule and the Zoom links. Okay, for this first video, we're gonna check on the numbers. This is something we're doing pretty often, and there's some good news. The good news is that our predictions are consistently wrong. Each week I make predictions for Maine or the nation or whatnot, and they've been too high every time, and this is great. Those are not predictions that I wanted to be right. Quite glad that they're wrong. And so we'll spend some time talking about why that is, but mostly it's the reason that as we started making those predictions, there were pretty severe measures being put into place. Sheltering at home, quarantining, closing businesses. I mean, really pretty extreme stuff. So we would expect that to affect the growth factor, and it has, as we'll see in a minute. So we're going to look at some graphs. There's so many graphs on the internet right now. So this particular site I'll look at is not unique, but it's kind of encouraging. There are some bad news slides a little later on in this lesson, but we'll focus on the good news right now. So to do that, I'm going to go over to this site. It's a 91 DIVOC, so it's COVID-19 backwards, and it's pretty neat. They're just using Johns Hopkins data and making graphs. And there's lots of options in the graph in the bottom. So what you have right now is the vertical axis is logarithmic. These are just like the graphs essentially I was doing in my spreadsheet. Then you have days since, and then this first graph are all the countries, or not all the countries, but many of the countries, and they have this dotted line here with 1.35 daily. So the dotted line would be 35% daily growth, or a growth factor of 1.35, which was some of our initial estimates. And what do we see here is this overwhelming tendency of countries to be kind of peeling off. And there's 2 of them, a couple of them, China and South Korea, that are both pretty much horizontal, which would indicate no growth whatsoever. And there's been some skepticism about the numbers coming out of China, but not so much for South Korea. But we can see some other countries are nearing horizontal, like Iran, Norway, Austria. So these are really encouraging. And the same with the United States too, right? At one point, we were increasing a bit faster than 35% a day. And certainly initially, it was right on target. But then, the tide started to turn. And, you think about where this is, whatever, day 19, about 2 weeks after all kinds of stuff was happening, we're seeing a change. So what's kind of neat here is you can show countries, you can pick different lines to look at, and it'll tell us the United States right now is about 7% growth. You can do confirmed cases, new cases, etc. And we're going to go through those on the next graph. So here's a graph of the U.S. and all the states. Full screen here. And again, this is kind of encouraging. What we're seeing here is all of these colored lines peeling away from this dotted line. If you go back to some of the early slides, 30%, 25% growth was what we were seeing, what we were predicting, especially for Maine, based off early data. But look at Maine, right? It's really gone off, and it's not quite horizontal yet. In fact, I think it'll tell us. Yeah. Whoops. That's kind of messy. Let's do like 3-day trend instead. And I'll say it's a growth factor of about 1.05. And we'll look at some data in the spreadsheet that'll confirm that from our data. This is great. Now 5% growth is still growth, and the numbers are still increasing, but we're getting close to flattening off, and that's great. You see up here is New York and New Jersey. Again, they're still growing and growing faster, but they are bending away, and that's encouraging. Really, really encouraging. Now, let's talk a little bit about the sorts of things we're seeing. These are confirmed cases. Confirmed cases, well, and actually, let's also go to linear. So if I click on linear, these are the graphs we'll see. And these will only continue to grow, either grow or flatten out. At some point, we expect this to kind of flatten out logarithmically. Logistically, sorry, not logarithmically, but logistically. But these numbers never go down. They might flatline, but they never go down. And so other things we may want to look at are new cases per day. And that's different. This is pretty noisy data. And this is obviously really affected by testing. And so what are we seeing here in terms of new cases per day, say in New York? Well, it's kind of all over the place. But it's a little kind of curved here. And we're hearing this sort of thing that maybe they're tapering off, right? We're not continuing this growth upwards. So maybe this is a sign that we're peaking. New cases per day is something that can peak, whereas total cases, this is never going to peak. This will just flatten off at some point, and we won't have any more. So new cases per day can give us potentially some information about how we're doing. Then there is, so deaths, this is like confirmed cases. This is never going to peak, right? This is cumulative. We just keep adding each new counted death, remembering that these are only the ones that are dying in hospitals. People that are dying at home are not necessarily being tested at all, so there are undercounting. But this, at best, is going to flatten off sometime here. And maybe New Jersey, maybe sooner, who knows? New York, it's hard to tell. And so we go to the analogous to new cases per day, there's new deaths per day. And this is kind of encouraging. Maybe this is the peak. Maybe we're going down the other side. So looking at new cases per day or new deaths per day give us a sense of what's happening now that may have been different before. So this is something we are looking for a peak, right? This is a rate, sort of the death rate, if you will, or with new cases per day would be the infection rate. So this is we're trying to flatten this out. We're not trying to flatten confirmed cases out. That doesn't get flattened. That just eventually peters off. So those are some graphs. And again, they're kind of encouraging. All right. So let's see. Let's go back to our slides here. Encouraging graphs. So the site that I was just at, I have linked. This word encouraging graphs is a link. You can click on it. You can go see those graphs. They're pretty interesting. So just a summary. There's a bunch of things you can look at, but total cases, best case scenario, this flatlines and doesn't grow anymore. So it can grow or not grow, but it never goes down. This is cumulative. Total deaths never goes down. It either increases or stops increasing and becomes a horizontal asymptote. New cases per day, this is something that will peak. The eventual graph of new cases per day will be something like a hump, like a camel's hump. And new deaths per day, this is something that will also peak like a camel's hump. So, and in the top hat questions that follow this, I'll give you some graphs and ask you to identify which graph could possibly represent these ideas. Because it's important to recognize that if you want something that's telling us what's happening now, that's these things, versus what's been happening. Now we'll show you, go to our spreadsheet as well. So let's see here. So what I've been doing, and there was a little confusion last week, is we can calculate the growth factor from 2 points. But what that does is it leaves out all the other data. So that can be good and bad. It can be good in that it misses a clear pattern. Here there was a particular pattern for a while. So what's happening here is we have this line, this light blue line, and there's an equation of the line, mx plus b, and the m is important. This is the thing, you take the letter E, 2 point whatever, raise it to this power, and you get the growth factor. But it's the average growth factor for all of the data. And you can see that recently, these points are under this best fit line, which indicates that things are improving. And we just saw that on the 91 dive walk page. So if I were to go ahead and take more recent data and graph just that data and fit a regression line to it, I'll have this number, 0.0427 is the slope. And if I do e to that power, I get about 4 or 5%, indicating that over the past, 8 days, if I look at only the past 8 days of data, the total cases in Maine is increasing at 4 or 5%. And that's great. That's a huge improvement over early predictions of 25%. So it's really great for these predictions, the early predictions, to not pan out. Otherwise, we would have had thousands by now. And I think we're only just over 600 recently. So that's really encouraging news. So sometimes that's what has to happen, is to take maybe recent data and plot a line with that data, because it's distinctly different than all the previous data. So I will give you I'll give you an equation like this about recent data. Let's see, I think Louisiana has not suffered, but had a similar thing, right? I've been updating the data here. I need to add another point, and you can tell that Louisiana also has these data points are under the line, indicating that the growth factor is decreasing. And again, that's really encouraging. That growth factor is decreasing. And in both Maine and Louisiana, I calculated it. And early growth factors, we're talking like 2.13, 1.18, 1.49, 1.44. And, they're definitely increasing. These are just daily ones. So this is really encouraging data. So that's the good news. Crap. All right, I'm going to pause there and get my slides up. I'm sure the next slide was pause for practice anyway. So I'm going to pause this, and then we'll get back to it later.